My name is Victoria Harrington, and at 36, I've built what many would consider an enviable career. I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Meridian Capital, managing portfolios worth billions. I have a corner office with a view of the Boston skyline, a penthouse apartment in Beacon Hill, and enough financial security that I haven't checked my bank balance before making a purchase in years. But all of this pales in comparison to the shock I experienced when my younger sister opened our father's safe deposit box last summer. A moment that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family, my career, and the legacy I'd spent my entire adult life protecting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The quarterly investment committee meeting was running long, as it often did. Around the mahogany conference table sat Meridian Capital's executive leadership, 12 men and 3 women, including myself. As Chief Investment Officer, I was presenting our Q3 performance metrics, which had exceeded targets by 18%. The firm's managing partners nodded approvingly as I walked through the complex derivatives strategy that had helped us outperform the market yet again. "Excellent work, Victoria," remarked Gerald Reynolds, the firm's founding partner. "This is exactly why we brought you onto the leadership team 5 years ago. Your analytical precision is unmatched." I acknowledged the compliment with a professional smile, the kind that conveys gratitude without revealing too much. It was a skill I'd perfected over my 15-year career in finance, maintaining a composed exterior regardless of circumstances. My colleagues often joked that I could announce either the end of the world or a billion-dollar windfall with the same measured tone. After the meeting concluded, I returned to my office and closed the door. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Boston Harbor, where sailboats dotted the water on this clear September afternoon. The view had been part of my negotiation package when I was promoted to CIO, a small but meaningful victory in an industry where every advantage had to be hard-won, especially for women. My executive assistant, Mark, knocked briefly before entering with a stack of reports. "The Singapore team sent over their analysis of the Asian markets, and the compliance department needs your signature on the new risk assessment protocols," he said, placing them on my desk. "Also, your sister called again. That's the 3rd time. This week." I suppressed a sigh. "Did she say what she wanted?" "Just that it's about your father's company and that it's urgent." "It's always urgent with Rebecca," I replied, reaching for the reports. "I'll call her back later." Mark hesitated at the door. She sounded different this time, almost worried. I glanced up, momentarily surprised by his assessment. Mark had been my assistant for 4 years and rarely offered personal observations. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, effectively dismissing him. Once alone, I stared at my phone, contemplating whether to return Rebecca's call immediately. My younger sister and I had a complicated relationship that had only grown more strained after our father's unexpected death 6 months ago. Rebecca, at 32, had always been Dad's favorite, something neither of them particularly tried to hide. She shared his entrepreneurial spirit and impulsive nature, while I had inherited our mother's methodical approach and attention to detail. Morgan Harrington had founded Harrington Technologies in his garage 35 years ago, building it into a respectable mid-sized cybersecurity firm with government contracts and a solid reputation in the industry. When he suffered a fatal heart attack in March, his succession plan had shocked everyone. Rebecca would take over as CEO, despite her limited experience in the cybersecurity field and her somewhat erratic professional history. I had been blindsided by the decision. Although I had built my career in finance rather than technology, I had served on Harrington Technologies' board for the past decade, providing financial oversight and strategic guidance. I understood the company's operations, its challenges, and its potential better than Rebecca ever could. Yet my father had passed her the reins with full confidence that she was the right choice. "You've already made your mark in the world, Victoria," he had told me during our last conversation, just a week before his death. "Rebecca needs this opportunity to prove herself. The company will benefit from her creativity and vision. I had nodded politely, swallowing my objections out of respect. Now, 6 months later, I was still processing the implications of his decision. Rebecca had been calling me frequently with questions about the company's finances, its client relationships, and its internal politics, all things she should have understood before taking the helm. Deciding that I couldn't focus on the Singapore report until I addressed whatever new crisis Rebecca was facing, I picked up my phone and dialed her number. "Vic, finally," Rebecca answered on the first ring, her voice indeed tinged with an unusual tension. "I've been trying to reach you for days." "I'm aware," I replied evenly. "I've been in back-to-back meetings. What's going on?" "I found something in Dad's safe deposit box. Something that doesn't make sense." She paused dramatically, a habit that had always irritated me. Rebecca had a flair for theatrics that seemed entirely at odds with professional leadership. "What exactly did you find?" I prompted, checking my watch. I had another meeting in 20 minutes. "I can't explain it over the phone," she insisted. "You need to see this for yourself. Can you come to Dad's house tonight? I'm staying there while my condo is being renovated." Our father's colonial-style home in Cambridge had been left to both of us jointly, with the understanding that we would eventually sell it and split the proceeds. Neither of us had been ready to part with it yet, so Rebecca's temporary residence, there made practical sense, even if I found it somewhat unsettling to imagine her living among our father's belongings. "Rebecca, I have dinner with the Eastman Group tonight. They're considering moving their pension fund under our management. It's a potential $400 million account." "Cancel it," she said flatly. "Trust me, Vic, this is more important than any client dinner. This is about Dad's legacy, and it affects both of us." I felt a familiar tension headache beginning at my temples. Rebecca had always been prone to exaggeration, seeing crises where there were merely challenges and opportunities, where there were often just risks. But Mark's comment about her sounding different nagged at me. "I can't cancel tonight," I said firmly. "But I can come by tomorrow morning. I'll clear my calendar until 10 a.m. Rebecca was silent for a moment, apparently weighing whether to push further. Finally, she acquiesced. "Fine. Tomorrow at 7:30, come to Dad's office. And Vic, don't tell anyone you're coming, not even your assistant." The request was odd enough to pique my interest further. "Why the secrecy?" "Because I don't know who to trust anymore," she replied, her voice dropping to an uncharacteristic whisper. "And after what I found, I'm not sure you will either." After we hung up, I sat back in my leather chair, momentarily distracted from the reports awaiting my attention. Rebecca's cryptic warning was probably another example of her dramatic tendencies, but something in her tone had seemed genuinely disturbed. Whatever she had found in our father's safe deposit box had clearly shaken her. The rest of my afternoon proceeded with clockwork precision, a series of calls with portfolio managers, a review of potential acquisition targets, and preparation for my dinner with the Eastman Group. Through it all, however, Rebecca's words echoed in my mind. "I don't know who to trust anymore." That evening, as I sat across from Walter Eastman and his financial team at Sorellina, one of Boston's finest Italian restaurants, I found myself struggling to maintain my usual focused engagement. The portfolio presentation went smoothly. I had prepared extensively, as always. But during the casual conversation that followed, my thoughts kept drifting to whatever revelation awaited me the next morning. "Victoria, Walter was just asking about your perspective on the emerging markets correction," prompted Diane Winters, Meridian's business development director, giving me a subtle but pointed look. "Forgive me," I said, smoothly recovering. "I was just considering how the situation resembles the 2018 contraction, but with some crucial differences." I launched into an analysis that seemed to satisfy Walter, but the momentary lapse bothered me. I prided myself on impeccable professional focus. By the time I returned to my penthouse that night, It was nearly 11. The lights of Boston Harbor glittered beyond my windows, but I barely noticed the view as I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of Cabernet. My apartment was elegant but Spartan, more a showcase of careful curation than a reflection of personal warmth. Like my office, it projected success and sophistication, but revealed little about the woman who inhabited it. I carried my wine to the floor-to-ceiling windows and gazed out at the city. Despite my outward success, the prestigious position, the investment portfolio that had made me financially independent by 30, the respect of my peers, there was an emptiness I rarely acknowledged. The timing of the first suspicious payments coincides with that failed expansion into Europe that cost the company millions. A memory surfaced, Dad appearing uncharacteristically stressed during family dinners that year, dismissing questions about work with vague assurances that everything was under control. I had attributed his tension to normal business pressures, never imagining something more sinister. If these allegations are true, I said, choosing my words carefully, what does it mean for the company now? Agent Donovan straightened in his chair. That's complicated. We're in the preliminary stages of an investigation. At this point, we're trying to determine the full scope of the situation before taking official action. Ms. Harrington, Rebecca, did the right thing by coming forward voluntarily, which will certainly be taken into consideration. Taken into consideration? I echoed, my voice sharper than intended. Are you implying that Rebecca or the company might face charges for actions taken by our father? The legal doctrine of successor liability means that the company itself could be held responsible for prior violations, even under new leadership, Agent Donovan explained. However, the fact that Rebecca discovered and reported these potential violations immediately is a significant mitigating factor. Rebecca leaned forward, her exhaustion momentarily replaced by intensity. That's why I needed you here, Vic. You're the financial expert. You understand corporate liability better than anyone I know. I need your help to navigate this without destroying everything Dad built. The irony wasn't lost on me. For months, I had resented being passed over for leadership of our father's company, and now Rebecca was asking for my expertise to save it from his apparent misdeeds. But beneath my professional analysis of the situation, a more personal earthquake was occurring. The foundation of trust and admiration upon which I had built my relationship with my father was crumbling. There's something else you should know, Rebecca said quietly, sensing my internal struggle. The email correspondence suggests that someone else within the company was aware of these arrangements. Dad refers to a trusted advisor who helped structure the offshore accounts. My blood ran cold. As a board member responsible for financial oversight, I should have detected any major irregularities. Had I missed something obvious? Or worse, did Rebecca suspect that I might have been complicit? I had nothing to do with this, I said firmly, meeting her gaze. If I had seen any indication of illegal activity, I would have reported it immediately. I know that, Rebecca replied without hesitation. That's why I called you. You've always been ethical to a fault, Vic. Sometimes annoyingly so. The ghost of a smile crossed her face before fading. But someone senior at Harrington Technologies was helping Dad, and we need to figure out who before they realize we're onto them. Agent Donovan checked his watch. I need to get back to the field office. We'll be in touch regarding next steps, but in the meantime, I strongly advise both of you to keep this information confidential. If whoever was working with your father gets wind of the investigation, they might destroy evidence or worse. After the agent left, Rebecca and I sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the morning's revelations settling heavily between us. The ticking of the antique clock on Dad's desk seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. I can't believe this is happening, Rebecca finally said, her voice small. Everything I thought I knew about Dad, about the company I'm now responsible for, it's all built on a lie. I had never seen my confident, carefree sister look so defeated. Despite our differences and the competitive undercurrent that had defined our relationship for years, my instinct to protect her surfaced unexpectedly. "We don't have all the facts yet," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "Before we draw any conclusions about Dad or the company, we need to conduct our own investigation. There might be explanations we haven't considered." Rebecca looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "You'll help me then?" The rational part of my mind screamed that I should distance myself from this situation immediately. My career at Meridian Capital could be jeopardized by association. With a scandal of this magnitude, the prudent move would be to resign from Harrington Technologies board and let Rebecca handle the mess she'd inherited. But as I looked around the office where our father had worked for decades, where he had sometimes allowed me to sit and help, as a child, sorting colored paper clips while he made important calls, something deeper than professional calculation took hold. "Yes," I said finally. "I'll help you. But we do this methodically, discreetly, and by the book. If Dad did something wrong, we need to understand the full extent of it and make it right. And if someone else in the company was involved, we need to identify them before they can cause more damage." Rebecca nodded, relief washing over her. Exhausted features. "Thank you, Vic. I knew I could count on you, despite everything." As I drove back to Boston an hour later, my mind was churning with implications and next steps. My carefully organized life had been upended in a single morning. The father I had idolized, whose approval I had sought through every achievement in my career, might have been engaged in criminal activity for years. The company that bore our family name, that represented his legacy, was now under threat because of his actions. And yet, amid the shock and betrayal, I felt something unexpected stirring. A sense of purpose beyond the pursuit of professional advancement and financial success that had driven me for so long. Rebecca needed me, not just for my expertise, but for my strength and moral clarity. For the first time in years, I was being called to something that transcended spreadsheets and investment strategies. As I pulled into the parking garage beneath Meridian Capital's building, I made a decision. I would clear my calendar for the next 2 weeks, citing a family emergency. My team was capable of handling day-to-day operations without me. This situation demanded my full attention, not just to protect my own reputation and future, but because it was the right thing to do. The safe deposit box had revealed more than just potential corporate malfeasance. It had exposed the hollowness at the core of what I had valued and pursued. Now I faced a choice about what kind of person, what kind of daughter, sister, and leader I truly wanted to be. Taking 2 weeks of personal leave? This is highly unusual, Victoria. Gerald Reynolds leaned back in his leather chair, studying me with the shrewd assessment that had made him one of Boston's most successful investment managers. The Eastman Group is expected to make their decision by next Friday. They specifically requested your involvement in the transition process. I maintained eye contact across his expansive desk, my resolve unwavering despite the implicit disapproval in his tone. I understand the timing is inconvenient, Gerald. I wouldn't ask if it weren't absolutely necessary. My family situation requires immediate attention. Is it a health issue? His expression softened slightly, professionalism temporarily yielding to human concern. It's complicated, I replied, choosing my words carefully. A matter that affects my family's legacy and requires my expertise to resolve. Gerald sighed, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against his desk calendar. Your team can handle the day-to-day operations, but I'm concerned about the Eastman account. Diane can manage most aspects, but she doesn't have your depth of knowledge on quantitative strategies. I've prepared comprehensive briefing materials for Diane, and I'll be available by phone for any critical questions, I assured him. But I need this time, Gerald. In 15 years at Meridian, I've never requested personal leave outside of scheduled vacations. I wouldn't ask now if there were any alternative. He studied me for another moment, then nodded reluctantly. 2 weeks, Victoria. If you need more time after that, we'll need to discuss interim leadership arrangements for your department. Understood. Thank you for your support. As I left his office, I felt a strange mixture of relief and trepidation. In my meticulously planned career, I had never deviated from the path I had set for myself. Taking this time away, potentially jeopardizing the Eastman account, and my standing at the firm, represented a significant departure from my usual calculated approach to professional advancement. Back in my office, I found Mark already fielding calls about my sudden absence. I've rescheduled your meetings for the next 2 weeks and notified your direct reports about the temporary reporting structure, he said, handing me a folder. Here's the contact information for everyone who needs to be kept in the loop. Diane has specifically requested a briefing before you leave. Thank you, Mark. Please clear my schedule for the rest of the day. I need to prepare those briefing materials for Diane and handle some personal arrangements. Once alone, I opened my laptop and began creating a secure document folder labeled Project Legacy. My training in financial forensics would be essential for the task ahead, but I needed to be methodical. First, I made a list of all the contracts mentioned in the suspicious financial documents Rebecca had shown me, noting dates, amounts, and the government agencies involved. Next, I drafted a timeline of Harrington Technologies' major business developments during the same period. The European expansion failure, subsequent strategic shifts, key personnel changes, and board decisions. I needed to understand the context in which our father might have made the choice to cross ethical and legal lines. As I worked, I received a text from Rebecca. Lawrence wants an emergency board meeting tomorrow. Claims it's about Q3 financial projections. Should we be worried? Lawrence Blackwell had been our father's right-hand man for over 20 years, serving as chief operating officer, and since Dad's death, as Rebecca's primary advisor in running the company. In his 60s, Lawrence was approaching retirement, age but had delayed his departure after Dad's death to help with the transition. I had always respected his business acumen and steady leadership, though we had occasionally disagreed about growth strategies during board meetings. Not necessarily, I texted back, but I'll attend in person rather than by video. Don't mention anything about what we discussed this morning. Act normal. After sending the text, I sat back in my chair, considering the implications. If someone inside Harrington Technologies had helped our father set up the questionable financial arrangements, Lawrence Blackwell would be an obvious candidate. He had the authority, the access, and the knowledge. But he had also been fiercely loyal to our father and had welcomed Rebecca into her leadership role with seemingly genuine support. It was difficult to reconcile the Lawrence I knew with someone who would participate in bribery or fraud. Then again, I had found it equally difficult to reconcile such actions with the father I thought I knew. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Diane Winters, Meridian's business development director, calling about the Eastman account. I spent the next hour walking her through the complex derivatives strategy I had designed specifically for their pension fund, emphasizing the risk mitigation aspects that had impressed Walter Eastman during our dinner. I think I understand the approach, Diane said after I had explained the key components. But Victoria, I have to ask, is everything all right? This sudden leave of absence isn't like you. I appreciate your concern, Diane, but it's a family matter that requires my personal attention. I'm confident you'll represent the strategy effectively to the Eastmans. After ending the call, I finished compiling the materials my team would need during my absence, then gathered my personal items. As I prepared to leave the office, I caught my reflection in the window, the polished, professional image I had cultivated for so many years. For a moment, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back at me had always known exactly who she was and where she was going. Now, that certainty had been shattered. I drove to my apartment to pack essentials for what might be an extended stay at my father's house. The decision to temporarily relocate there had come to me while preparing the timeline. If Rebecca and I were going to investigate thoroughly, we would need access to Dad's home office and any materials he might have kept there. More importantly, we needed to prevent anyone else from accessing potential evidence. As I packed a suitcase with business attire and casual clothing, I called my property manager to arrange for mail collection and periodic checks of my apartment. The efficient, compartmentalized nature of my life made these logistics relatively simple. Few personal entanglements meant few complications when making sudden changes. This realization prompted an uncomfortable moment of self-reflection. When had I become so isolated? I had colleagues, clients, and professional acquaintances, but few people I could genuinely call friends. My last serious relationship had ended 3 years ago, when Marcus, a corporate attorney I had dated for 8 months, accepted a position in London. We had parted amicably, both prioritizing our careers over a long-distance relationship. Since then, I had gone on occasional dates, but nothing that developed into something meaningful. My mother's words from her hospital bed echoed in my mind. All this planning, all this control, it doesn't protect you from life's uncertainties. It just keeps you from fully experiencing the life you have. I pushed the thought aside. Now wasn't the time for existential reflection. I had a concrete problem to solve, potentially criminal activity involving my family's company, and I needed to focus my energy on that immediate challenge. By late afternoon, I had arrived back at my father's house with my suitcase and several boxes of financial analysis tools, reference materials, and secure storage devices. Rebecca met me at the door, her expression a mixture of surprise and relief. "You're moving in?" she asked, eyeing my luggage. "Temporarily. If we're going to investigate this properly, I need full access to Dad's office and any records he kept here. Besides, it's safer if we're both on site. We don't know who else might be involved or what they might do to cover their tracks." Rebecca nodded, helping me carry my things inside. "I've set up a secure server in the home office and started organizing Dad's physical files. There's a lot to go through." "What about the board meeting tomorrow? Has Lawrence provided an agenda?" "Just the basics: Q3 projections, updates on the Miller contract negotiations, and a staffing review for the executive team." She led me upstairs to my old bedroom, which looked much as it had when I left for college, though the twin bed had been replaced with a more practical queen-sized one. He didn't mention anything unusual, but he seemed tense when I spoke with him on the phone. That could be normal concern about the company's performance, I pointed out, setting my suitcase on the bed. "Let's not read too much into it until we have more information." We spent the next few hours in Dad's office, methodically cataloging the contents of his files and computer records. Rebecca had already created an encrypted database to track what we found, showing surprising technical skill that I hadn't realized she possessed. "Where did you learn to set up secure systems like this?" I asked as she demonstrated the database's features. "MIT computer science degree, remember? Just because I bounced around between jobs after graduation doesn't mean I didn't retain the skills." There was a hint of defensiveness in her tone that made me realize how often I had underestimated her capabilities. "I'm impressed," I said sincerely. "This will make our investigation much more efficient." She smiled briefly, the tension between us easing slightly. "I ordered dinner from that Thai place on Cambridge Street that you like. Should be here in about 20 minutes. The gesture surprised me. I couldn't remember the last time Rebecca had made any effort to accommodate my preferences. Our relationship had been so competitive for so long that simple kindnesses had become rare between us. As we continued working, I found myself studying my sister when she wasn't looking. The Rebecca I knew had always been impulsive, creative, and somewhat chaotic, traits that had frustrated me but had clearly endeared her to our father. Now, faced with a potential catastrophe, she was displaying a methodical focus I hadn't believed her capable of. Perhaps Dad had seen something in her that I had missed. After dinner, we moved to the kitchen table with our laptops, spreading out the financial documents from the safe deposit box. I began cross-referencing the offshore account transactions with Harrington Technologies' financial statements from the same periods, looking for discrepancies that might reveal how the questionable payments had been disguised in the company's books. The timing of these transfers is interesting, I noted, pointing to a series of transactions. Each one occurs approximately 45 days after a major contract announcement. That's typically when initial payment milestones would be reached on government projects. Rebecca leaned closer to examine the pattern. So Dad might have been skimming a percentage off the top of legitimate contract payments? Possibly, but the accounting would need to be manipulated to hide that. These amounts should have been noticeable in the financial reviews. I frowned, troubled by the implication. As a board member, I reviewed quarterly financials. Either the discrepancies were hidden extremely well, or the financial reports presented to the board were falsified. Rebecca finished my thought, which would implicate the CFO at minimum. Harold Bennett. I considered the possibility. Harold had been with the company for nearly 15 years, joining shortly after I had started my career at Meridian. He was competent, unassuming, and had always seemed transparent in his financial presentations to the board. We'll need to review his communications with Dad and examine the raw financial data, not just the reports that were presented to the board. We worked late into the night, creating a detailed investigation plan and assigning ourselves specific areas to focus on. By the time we finally stopped, it was after midnight, and we had filled several whiteboards with questions, connections, and potential leads to pursue. As we prepared to turn in for the night, Rebecca paused at the door to her bedroom, formerly our parents' master suite. Vic, regardless of what we find, thank you for doing this. I know what it cost you to take leave from Meridian. The simple acknowledgement of my sacrifice touched me unexpectedly. It's our family's company, Becca. Whatever Dad did, we need to understand it and make it right. She nodded, a ghost of our childhood nickname for each other, something I hadn't used in years, bringing a fleeting smile to her tired face. Good night, Vic. As I settled into my old bedroom, surrounded by debate trophies and academic awards, from my high school years, I felt strangely disoriented. In less than 24 hours, my perfectly ordered life had been completely upended. I was sleeping in my childhood bed, working alongside the sister I had grown distant from, investigating potential crimes committed by the father I had idolized, and risking the career I had built with single-minded determination. Yet despite the uncertainty and potential danger ahead, I felt more alive than I had in years. The challenge before me engaged both my analytical skills and a deeper sense of purpose that my work at Meridian had never quite fulfilled. The complexity of uncovering the truth while protecting what could be salvaged of our father's legacy demanded more than just technical expertise. It required moral courage and familial loyalty that transcended professional achievement. As I drifted toward sleep, I realized that this reluctant journey might be taking me somewhere I needed to go, whether I had planned for it or not. The Harrington Technologies boardroom projected power and stability. Situated on the top floor of a glass tower in Cambridge's technology corridor, the space featured a 20-foot mahogany conference table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River. My father had designed it to impress government officials and potential clients, a physical manifestation of the company's solid reputation. How ironic that reputation now seemed, given what Rebecca and I had discovered. I arrived 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting time, nodding to the receptionist who did a double-take at my unexpected presence. Ms. Harrington, we weren't expecting you in person today. Last-minute change of plans, Andrea. Is the Thompson conference room available? I'd like to review some materials before the board meeting. Of course, I'll have it prepared immediately. The Thompson room was a smaller space used for client meetings, offering privacy and a secure network connection. Once inside, I connected. my laptop to the company system using the board member access credentials I had maintained after declining an operational role in the company years ago. For the next 20 minutes, I downloaded copies of the past 3 years' financial records, the raw data, not the processed reports that had been presented to the board. A soft knock at the door interrupted my work. Lawrence Blackwell entered, his tall frame impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, silver hair perfectly groomed. At 64, he maintained the fitness and sharp appearance of someone 15 years younger. His expression registered momentary surprise at seeing me before settling into a warm smile. "Victoria, what an unexpected pleasure." Rebecca mentioned, "You might call in, but I didn't realize you'd be joining us in person." "Hello, Lawrence." I stood, accepting his offered handshake. Given the nature of the financial discussions today, I thought it would be more productive to be here physically. Always the consummate professional. He glanced at my laptop screen, where I had quickly minimized the file download window. "Preparing for the meeting? I assure you the Q3 projections are quite straightforward, though not as robust as we'd hoped." "I like to do my own analysis," I replied evenly. "Old habits from my Meridian work." Something flickered across Lawrence's expression. Concern? Unease? It disappeared so quickly I couldn't be certain. "Of course. Your financial expertise has always been invaluable to the board. In fact, I've been meaning to call you about increasing your advisory role now that Rebecca is settling into leadership. Perhaps we could discuss it over dinner next week." The invitation seemed innocent enough, but I wondered if it might be an attempt to gauge what I knew or suspected. "That would be lovely, though my schedule is quite committed at the moment. Perhaps in a few weeks?" "Certainly." He checked his watch. "The other board members should be arriving shortly. Shall we head to the main boardroom?" Rebecca texted that she's running about 10 minutes late. Some issue with the Miller contract. That required her immediate attention. As we walked together down the corridor, I considered Lawrence's demeanor. Nothing in his behavior indicated guilt or anxiety beyond the normal concerns of a COO facing a challenging financial quarter. Either he was an exceptional actor, or he genuinely knew nothing about the offshore accounts and government contracts. The other board members arrived in quick succession. Harold Bennett, the CFO whose potential involvement troubled me most, Dr. Elaine Porter, our Chief Technology Officer, James Livingston, a venture capitalist who had been an early investor in the company, and Terrence Washington, a retired Air Force general who had joined the board 2 years ago to help navigate government contracting processes. I greeted each of them cordially while observing their reactions to my presence. Harold seemed particularly surprised, his handshake slightly clammy. "Victoria, I didn't expect to see you today. I thought you were tied up with that major account at Meridian." "I've arranged coverage for a few days to focus on family matters," I replied, watching him carefully. "Including Harrington Technology's current position." Harold nodded, adjusting his glasses nervously, a habit I'd noticed in previous board meetings whenever challenging questions arose about financial projections. "Well, we're certainly glad to have your expertise at the table." Rebecca arrived just as we were taking our seats, looking considerably more put together than she had at the house that morning. In her navy suit and silk blouse, with her auburn hair swept into a professional updo, she projected the executive confidence our father had always displayed. Only I could see the tension in her eyes as they briefly met mine across the table. "Thank you all for accommodating this somewhat urgent meeting," Lawrence began after Rebecca called the session to order. "I've asked Harold to prepare an updated financial projection for Q3 that I believe warrants immediate board attention." Harold distributed tablets preloaded with presentation materials. "As you'll see on page 3, our projected revenue for this quarter has been revised downward by approximately 18% from our previous estimates. This is primarily due to delays in the Artemis project deployment and unexpected cost overruns on the NSA security protocols implementation." I scrolled through the presentation, analyzing the figures while maintaining an outwardly calm demeanor. The projected shortfall was significant but not catastrophic. What interested me more were the specific government contracts referenced. Both appeared on the list of projects connected to the suspicious offshore payments. "What's causing the cost overruns on the NSA implementation?" I asked, directing my question to both Harold and Elaine. Elaine responded first. "We encountered unexpected compatibility issues with their legacy systems that weren't identified during the initial assessment. Resolving them required additional development resources and specialized equipment." "And was this communicated to the client? Will they absorb any of these additional costs?" I pressed. Harold and Lawrence exchanged a quick glance that might have gone unnoticed by others, but my attention was specifically focused on such subtle interactions. "We're in negotiations about cost sharing," Lawrence replied. "But we've had to commit resources up front to maintain the project timeline, which is affecting our quarterly cash flow." The meeting continued with detailed discussions of various operational challenges and strategic responses. I participated actively but judiciously, asking pointed questions without revealing any knowledge of the offshore accounts. Throughout the 2-hour session, I observed the dynamics between board members, particularly noting who deferred to whom on different topics. General Washington seemed particularly invested in discussions about the government contracts, occasionally steering conversations away from specific implementation details toward broader strategic considerations. His military background made this natural enough, but in light of what Rebecca had discovered, I wondered if there might be more to his interventions. "Before we conclude," Rebecca said as the meeting neared its end, "I'd like to propose forming a special committee to conduct a comprehensive review of our financial protocols and contract fulfillment processes. Given the challenges we're facing this quarter, it seems prudent to ensure our systems are operating with maximum efficiency and transparency." The suggestion appeared innocent, a new CEO demonstrating due diligence during a challenging period, but I recognized it as a strategic move to create legitimate access to the very information we needed for our investigation. "An excellent suggestion," I agreed, supporting her gambit. "In fact, I'd be willing to lead this committee, given my financial background and board experience. Perhaps with Harold's assistance, since he'll have the most direct access to the relevant data?" Harold's smile appeared forced. "Of course, though my team is quite stretched thin at the moment with quarter end approaching." "All the more reason to ensure everything is in order," I countered smoothly. "We could bring in independent resources to minimize the impact on your department." Lawrence leaned forward, steepling his fingers, a characteristic gesture when he was considering a complex problem. "Perhaps we could define the scope of this. Review more precisely before committing resources. Victoria, would you draft a proposal outlining the committee's objectives and required access? The board could review it next week." "I'd be happy to," I replied, recognizing his attempt to delay and potentially limit our investigation. "In fact, I've cleared my schedule to focus on family matters for the next 2 weeks. This would be a perfect use of that time." After the meeting adjourned, I lingered in the boardroom, ostensibly reviewing notes while observing who spoke with whom. Harold immediately engaged Lawrence in a hushed conversation by the window, both men glancing in my direction when they thought I wasn't looking. General Washington made a point of stopping by my seat. "Victoria, it's been too long since we've had a proper conversation," he said warmly. "Rebecca is doing remarkably well under the circumstances, but I know your father would appreciate your increased involvement during this transition." "Thank you, General. I've been thinking the same thing recently." "Terrence, please. We've known each other too long for formalities." He lowered his voice slightly. "If you're going to be conducting this financial review, I'd appreciate a conversation, off the record. There are some aspects of the government contracting process that might provide helpful context." The offer caught me off guard. Was he offering assistance or attempting to influence the direction of our investigation? "I'd welcome your insights, Terrence. Perhaps lunch next week?" "Perfect. I'll have my assistant contact you." With a nod, he departed, leaving me to wonder about his motives. Rebecca approached as the room cleared, keeping her expression professionally neutral despite the storm I knew was raging inside her. "Thank you for your support on the committee proposal. Will you join me in my office to discuss the initial framework?" "Of course," I replied, gathering my materials. As we walked through the executive corridor, I noticed subtle changes since my last visit. The portrait of our father that had hung prominently outside the CEO's office was now replaced by a more modern piece of abstract art. Rebecca's office itself had been completely redesigned. Gone were the dark wood and traditional furnishings our father had preferred, replaced by clean lines, ergonomic furniture, and a technology setup that looked more like a command center than an executive suite. "You've made changes," I observed after she closed the door. "The office needed to reflect its current occupant, not its former one," she replied, moving to a small conference table rather than sitting behind the imposing desk. "Besides, the new configuration is more practical for the way I work." I joined her at the table, lowering my voice despite the privacy of the closed office. "Did you notice the interaction between Harold and Lawrence after the meeting?" She nodded. "And General Washington's interest in your financial review committee? Something feels off with both of them." I managed to download the raw financial data before the meeting. We should be able to compare it with the reports presented to the board to identify any discrepancies. Rebecca leaned forward, her expression intense. "There's something else." While waiting for the Miller contract call this morning, I accessed Dad's executive email archive. I had his credentials from handling affairs after his death. There's a folder labeled Pinnacle Strategic with correspondence that appears to be in some kind of code. Names are replaced with chess pieces. Knight says delivery confirmed, or Bishop requires additional assurances. My pulse quickened. "Can you forward those emails to our secure server?" "Already done, but Vic, there's something else troubling me." Some of those coded emails were copied to an external address I don't recognize. Kingmaker a Proton Mail, com. I tried to trace it, but hit a dead end. The cryptic email address and chess references added new dimensions to an already complex investigation. "We need to cross-reference everyone involved in the relevant contracts, looking for any connections to chess, royal terminology, or anything that might indicate who Kingmaker might be." A knock at the door interrupted our discussion. Rebecca quickly switched her computer screen to a budget spreadsheet before calling, "Come in." Lawrence entered, his expression pleasant, but his eyes sharp with interest. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "I wanted to check if you needed any support with the committee proposal, Victoria." "That's thoughtful, Lawrence, but I think we have it under control," I replied. Rebecca was just providing some context on recent operational changes that might be relevant to the review. He nodded, but remained standing just inside the doorway. "I meant what I said earlier about increasing your involvement with the company. Victoria, your father always hoped you might take a more active role eventually, despite your success at Meridian." The comment seemed innocent enough, but something in his tone made me wonder if he was testing me, trying to determine if Dad had shared any sensitive information before his death. "Dad respected my choice to build my career elsewhere," I responded, carefully, though he certainly wasn't shy about offering opportunities to return to the family business. "Indeed." Lawrence smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, I'll leave you to your discussion. Rebecca, don't forget we have the call with the Pentagon procurement team at 3. After he left, Rebecca and I exchanged glances. "He's never come into my office unannounced before," she said quietly. "Not once in 6 months." "He's suspicious," I agreed. "The question is whether that's because he's involved or because he senses something unusual is happening and is concerned about the company. Either way, we need to be more careful. I'll tell my assistant we're not to be disturbed for the rest of the afternoon." We spent the next 2 hours developing a legitimate-looking proposal for the Financial Review Committee while actually planning our investigation strategy. On the surface, we were a CEO and board member diligently addressing potential financial issues. Beneath that, we were daughters trying to uncover the truth about their father's legacy while identifying potential co-conspirators who might still be operating within the company. As we worked, I found myself impressed by Rebecca's strategic thinking and technical knowledge. The sister I had often dismissed as impulsive and undisciplined was demonstrating a capacity for focused, methodical work that rivaled my own. Moreover, she showed a nuanced understanding of the company's operations that I, despite my board position, had never fully grasped. "You really know this business," I commented during a brief break. "I underestimated how much you absorbed from Dad over the years." Rebecca looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "That might be the first compliment you've given me since I took over as CEO." Her words stung with truth. I had been so focused on my own resentment at being passed over that I hadn't acknowledged her capabilities. "I'm beginning to understand why Dad chose you," I admitted. "You see the company as a living entity, not just a collection of assets and liabilities." She was quiet for a moment, twirling a pen between her fingers, another habit she shared with our father. "I always thought he chose me because you were unavailable, that he would have preferred you if you'd been interested." The vulnerability in her admission caught me off guard. All these years, while I had been harboring resentment over Dad's preference for Rebecca, she had been carrying her own insecurities about his choice. "I think he saw something in each of us," I said finally. "Different strengths that suited different roles. I'm just sorry it took these circumstances for me to recognize yours." The moment of connection between us felt foreign yet familiar, a return to a closeness we had shared as children before competition and different life paths had driven us apart. Whether we could maintain this renewed bond through the challenges ahead remained to be seen, but for now, it provided a foundation of trust we desperately needed. As we prepared to leave the office that evening, I received a text from Gerald. "Reynolds at Meridian. Eastman Group has questions about the derivative strategy. Diane struggling to address their concerns. Can you call Walter directly tomorrow?" The message underscored the professional risk I was taking by focusing on the Harrington Technologies investigation. The Eastman account represented not just significant revenue for Meridian, but a personal achievement that had positioned me for future advancement within the firm. Letting it slip away could have lasting consequences for my career. Yet as I looked at Rebecca gathering her things, the weight of responsibility on her shoulders evident in her posture, I knew I had made the right choice. Some obligations transcended professional ambition. Whatever our father had done, we needed to uncover the truth and address it, not just for the company's future, but for our own integrity. "Ready?" Rebecca asked, holding the door. "Ready," I confirmed, stepping into the corridor beside her. The first confrontation with the board had revealed potential allies and adversaries, but had raised as many questions as it answered. We were now irrevocably committed to this investigation, with powerful forces potentially aligned against us. The coming days would test not just our professional capabilities, but our moral courage and newfound trust in each other. As we walked through the executive suite, employees nodded respectfully, seeing the Harrington sisters presented as a united front for perhaps the first time. Little did they know that beneath our professional exteriors, we were embarking on a journey that would either salvage or destroy our father's legacy, and potentially transform our own in the process. The next morning found us in the attic of our family home, surrounded by dust-covered boxes of our father's personal papers. Rebecca had remembered that Dad kept archives of his early business dealings here, documentation that predated digital records and might provide context for his later decisions. "I haven't been up here since high school," I said, opening a box labeled Harrington Tech, 1988-1992. Inside were manila folders containing original business plans, handwritten notes, and newspaper clippings chronicling the company's early successes. Rebecca knelt beside another set of boxes. Dad was meticulous about keeping records, even from the beginning. He used to say that understanding your history was essential to planning your future. As I sifted through documents, I found myself transported back to my childhood. I could picture my father at the kitchen table, papers spread around him as he worked late into the night. He would let me sit with him sometimes, explaining concepts that were far beyond my years, but somehow made sense when he described them. In those moments, the connection between us had felt unbreakable, a shared passion for analysis and problem-solving that set me apart from my more spontaneous younger sister. "Look at this," Rebecca said, pulling me from my memories. She held up a photograph I hadn't seen in years. Our father standing outside a small office building, arm around a much younger Lawrence Blackwell. A hand-painted sign reading Harrington Technologies hung above the door. Their first real office after moving out of the garage. Dad took out a second mortgage on this house to lease that space. I studied the photograph, noting the determined expressions on both men's faces. They were taking a significant risk. Mom must have been concerned about the financial exposure. She was, Rebecca confirmed, but she believed in him completely. She told me once that the difference between entrepreneurs who succeed and those who fail often comes down to having someone who believes in them unconditionally. The observation struck me as surprisingly insightful. When did she tell you that? During my senior year of college, when I was trying to decide whether to accept that tech consulting job or join Dad's company. Rebecca placed the photograph carefully aside. I chose consulting because I wanted to prove I could succeed on my own merits, not just as the boss's daughter. Dad understood, but I think he was disappointed. This revelation surprised me. I had always assumed Rebecca had worked directly for our father immediately after graduation. I didn't realize you'd worked elsewhere before joining Harrington Technologies. She looked up, a wry smile crossing her face. There's a lot you don't know about my career path, Vic. I spent 3 years at Boston Consulting Group, then did a tech startup that failed spectacularly before Dad convinced me to come work for him. I was 30 before I joined the company. I absorbed this information silently, recognizing how my assumptions about Rebecca's professional journey had colored my perception of her leadership capabilities. While I had been building my reputation at Meridian, she had been gaining diverse experience that likely prepared her for the CEO role in ways I hadn't appreciated. We continued sorting through boxes, setting aside documents that might be relevant to our investigation. I found myself reading through early government contracts, noting how transparent and straightforward they appeared compared to the complex arrangements that were now under scrutiny. "Look at this," I said, holding up a contract from 1995. This early Department of Defense work had clear deliverables, transparent pricing, and straightforward terms. Nothing like the convoluted structures we're seeing in the recent contracts. Rebecca took the document, scanning it thoughtfully. The government procurement process has become much more complex since then, but you're right. There's a fundamental shift in approach. The question is when and why that shift occurred. As we continued our search, I discovered a collection of journals in a locked box at the back of the attic. The simple brass lock yielded easily to a paperclip, revealing a dozen leather-bound volumes, each meticulously dated. "Dad kept journals?" Rebecca asked, surprised. "He never mentioned that to me." "Nor to me," I replied, opening the earliest volume from 1987, the year he founded the company. These might give us insight into his decision-making process that wouldn't appear in official records. We brought the journals downstairs to the kitchen, where better light allowed for careful reading. I started with the earliest volumes while Rebecca began with the most recent, both of us searching for any mention of the government contracts in question or the offshore accounts. The early journals revealed a passionate entrepreneur driven by both technological innovation and a genuine desire to create security solutions that would protect critical infrastructure. His entries were filled with excitement about technical breakthroughs, concern for his small team's welfare, and occasional worries about meeting payroll during lean months. One entry from 1990 particularly struck me. Turn down the West Ridge. Contract today. Despite our desperate need for revenue, their request to backdoor the encryption protocol violated everything we stand for. Margaret says we made the right choice, though it means tightening our belts for another quarter. Integrity matters more than quarterly results. I read the passage aloud to Rebecca, my voice catching slightly. This was the father I remembered, principled, unwavering in his commitment to ethical business practices. That makes this situation even harder to comprehend, Rebecca said, looking up from a more recent journal. Listen to this entry from 2016, right after the European expansion failure. The board doesn't understand the existential threat we're facing. The failed expansion has left us dangerously exposed, with barely enough operating capital to fulfill existing contracts. L suggests an unorthodox approach to securing the Perseus project. I've always avoided such arrangements, but the alternative may be layoffs or even bankruptcy. What good are principals if they cost 300 people their livelihoods? L must be Lawrence, I said, feeling a chill. This suggests the questionable practices began as a response to financial pressure from the European expansion failure. Rebecca nodded grimly. That tracks with the timeline of the offshore accounts. The first suspicious transaction appears about 2 months after this journal entry. We continued reading, finding more troubling entries as the journals progressed. Our father documented increasing rationalization for his actions, first positioning them as temporary measures during a financial emergency, then later as necessary. Competitive tactics in a government contracting environment where everyone operates this way. A journal entry from 2018 revealed a man struggling with mounting ethical compromises. Met with C again today. His demands are increasing, but we're too deep in this system to extract ourselves without catastrophic consequences. L assures me the financial structures are untraceable. I find myself avoiding M's portrait in the hallway. Can't bear to see the disappointment I imagine in her eyes. C must be Carlisle, Rebecca said, and M is clearly Mom. He knew she would have disapproved. The reference to our mother hit me hard. Margaret Harrington had been the moral compass of our family, her integrity unwavering. She had also been the financial expert who had guided the company through its early growth. What would she have said if she had discovered these offshore accounts and questionable contracts? There's more, Rebecca said, reading from a journal dated just 3 months before our father's death. Met with V today regarding succession planning. She remains committed to her path at Meridian, which is perhaps for the best. The burden of what I've built, both its achievements and its compromises, should fall to me alone. R has the vision and technical understanding to lead the company forward, and perhaps the moral courage to eventually correct course where I have failed. I felt a complex wave of emotions wash over me. Relief that I hadn't been brought into the questionable arrangements, sadness at my father's moral struggle, and a new understanding of his decision to name Rebecca as his successor. He knew, I said quietly. He knew what he was doing was wrong, and he was trying to protect both of us in different ways. Me by keeping me at a distance from the company, and you by giving you the chance to set things right. Rebecca closed the journal, her expression somber. He never gave me any indication of these issues. No warnings, no guidance on what might need to be corrected. Just the mantle of leadership and apparently a ticking time bomb of legal liability. Perhaps he meant to address it before transition but ran out of time, I suggested. The heart attack was sudden, unexpected. Or perhaps he couldn't bring himself to admit what he'd done, even at the end. Rebecca stood, pacing the kitchen, in growing agitation. I've spent 6 months trying to live up to his legacy, to prove I was worthy of his confidence. Now I discover that legacy includes potential criminal activity that could destroy everything he built, everything he entrusted to me. The pain in her voice resonated with my own sense of disillusionment. The father we had both admired, whose approval we had sought in different ways, had been living a double life of sorts, building a respected company while engaging in practices that betrayed his original values. Yet as I reflected on the journal entries, a more nuanced picture emerged. Morgan Harrington hadn't started as a man looking to enrich himself through corruption. He had made an initial compromise during a financial crisis, then found himself trapped in an escalating pattern of questionable decisions, each one justified by the need to protect the company and its employees. I think we need to understand the full context before we judge him too harshly, I said, surprising myself with this defense. Dad wasn't perfect, but these journals suggest he was caught in a situation that spiraled beyond his control. Rebecca stopped pacing, regarding me with surprise. I expected you to be more condemning, given your emphasis on ethical financial practices. I still believe in those principles, I replied. But I also understand that real business situations can present impossible choices. The European expansion failure nearly bankrupted the company. Dad was facing the prospect of massive layoffs, possibly losing the company he'd built from nothing. That doesn't excuse his actions, but it helps explain them. Rebecca sat back down, rubbing her temples. Understanding why doesn't solve our current problem. Whatever his reasons, we're left with the consequences. And based on these journals, Lawrence Blackwell was involved from the beginning. And potentially this Carlyle person plus whoever Kingmaker is, I added. We need to determine exactly who knew what and who might still be actively involved in these arrangements. We spent the next several hours creating a detailed timeline that integrated information from the journals, the offshore account documents, and the company's official records. Patterns began to emerge. Specific government contracts that corresponded with unusual financial movements, board meetings where certain topics were deliberately avoided, and gradual changes in the company's contracting approach that had occurred, without formal strategic discussions. By late afternoon, we had filled an entire whiteboard with a complex web of connections, dates, and key events. Standing back to survey our work, I felt both clarity and apprehension. We now had a much better understanding of how our father's ethical compromises had begun and evolved. But we were also facing the sobering reality that untangling this situation would be far more difficult than we had initially imagined. We need to address the immediate legal exposure, I said, thinking aloud. Based on what we've uncovered, there are at least 3 major government contracts currently active that may involve questionable payment arrangements. Rebecca nodded, studying the whiteboard. And we need to identify everyone involved in these arrangements who is still with the company. Lawrence is the obvious starting point, but there must be others who helped implement and conceal these transactions. Harold Bennett is the most likely additional participant, given his role as CFO, I noted. Though the journals don't mention him directly by name, someone in the finance department would have been necessary to structure these payments. And what about General Washington? Rebecca asked. His addition to the board coincides with the expansion of government contracts. Could he be Kingmaker? It's possible, though his military background would suggest knight or another battlefield-related chess piece, I reasoned. We should investigate his connections to Carlyle and any chess-related associations in his background. As we continued discussing our next steps, my phone rang. Walter Eastman from the pension fund calling directly. I hesitated, knowing I should take the call to preserve my standing at Meridian, but equally aware that our investigation required my full attention. Take it, Rebecca urged, recognizing my dilemma. I'll keep working on this timeline. We can't afford to have you burn all your bridges professionally. I nodded gratefully and stepped into the living room to take the call. For the next 30 minutes, I walked Walter through the details of the derivative strategy I had designed for his fund, answering his technical questions with the precision and confidence that had become my professional trademark. By the call's end, his concerns had been addressed, and the account seemed secure. Returning to the kitchen, I found Rebecca adding more details to our timeline, a fresh pot of coffee brewing on the counter. She had marked several points with red asterisks. "What are those?" I asked, pouring myself a cup. "Moments when Dad almost changed course," she replied. 3 distinct instances where he considered ending the arrangements, only to be persuaded to continue. Once by Lawrence, once by financial pressures from a potential acquisition that fell through, and once after Mom died, when he seems to have lost his moral anchor. The observation was insightful, revealing a man who had never fully reconciled himself to the compromises he was making. Unlike a hardened criminal who embraced corruption, our father had remained conflicted, repeatedly contemplating a return to his original principles, but never finding the right moment or strength to make the break. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, I said softly, but one he kept looking for a way out of until the end. Rebecca's eyes met mine, showing a maturity and compassion I hadn't fully appreciated before. And now we're the ones who have to find that way out, not just for him or for ourselves, but for everyone whose livelihood depends on Harrington Technologies. In that moment, standing amid the scattered remnants of our father's private thoughts, I felt a shift in my perspective. This wasn't just about protecting the company's reputation or navigating legal exposure. It was about reclaiming the original vision and values that had driven Morgan Harrington to create his company in the first place, the ideals he had compromised but never stopped believing in. "We can do this," I said with newfound determination. "Between your technical knowledge and leadership within the company, and my financial expertise and external perspective, we have the skills to address this situation." Rebecca smiled, a genuine expression that reminded me of our childhood, before competition had complicated our relationship. The Harrington sisters against the world, just like when we were kids? Just like then, I agreed, but with considerably higher stakes. As the afternoon light faded into evening, we continued our work, strengthened by a shared purpose that transcended our individual ambitions and the complicated legacy our father had left us. The path ahead would be challenging and fraught with risk, but for the first time, I felt certain we were facing it together. Not as rivals, but as partners determined to honor the best of what our father had built while correcting the worst of his mistakes. We agreed to meet with General Washington at a discreet restaurant in Brookline, far from both the Harrington Technologies offices and our usual business haunts. The Vineyard, an upscale establishment known for its private dining rooms and discretion, offered the perfect setting for what could be a sensitive conversation. I arrived early, requesting a secluded corner table with a clear view of the entrance. The maitre d' recognized me. I had entertained Meridian clients here occasionally, and accommodated my request without question. As I waited, I reviewed the notes Rebecca and I had compiled after our discovery of our father's journals. General Terrence Washington had joined the Harrington Technologies Board 2 years ago, shortly after retiring from a distinguished 30-year military career. His expertise in defense systems and connections at the Pentagon had made him an invaluable asset for securing government contracts. We had identified 3 major defense projects that had been awarded to the company during his tenure, all showing irregular financial patterns in the raw data I had downloaded. Precisely at noon, Washington entered the restaurant. At 62, he maintained the straight-backed posture and alert demeanor of his military days. His silver hair was closely cropped, his tailored suit impeccable. As he approached my table, I noticed the slight hesitation in his gait, a reminder of the combat injury he had sustained in his early career. "Victoria," he said warmly, taking the seat across from me. "Thank you for making time for this conversation." "I appreciated your suggestion, Terrence," I replied, matching his formal yet cordial tone. You mentioned having context about government contracting that might be relevant to my financial review. He nodded, waiting until the server had taken our drink orders before continuing. I've been following your career at Meridian with interest. Your reputation for financial acumen is well-deserved, from what I've observed at board meetings. Thank you, I said, not allowing the flattery to distract me from my purpose, though I'm curious why you've taken such an interest in my work outside Harrington Technologies. A small smile crossed his face. Direct and precise, just like your father. Morgan valued that quality in you, you know. He often said you could spot a financial inconsistency from a mile away. The reference to my father gave me an opening. That's what makes this financial review so important. As a board member, I need to ensure the company's practices are sound, particularly given the challenges we're facing this quarter. Washington studied me for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Victoria, may I speak candidly, off the record as it were? Please do. He leaned forward slightly. I requested this meeting because I believe there may be aspects of Harrington Technologies' government contracting processes that warrant careful attention, matters that wouldn't appear in standard board presentations. My pulse quickened, though I maintained a neutral expression. What kind of matters are you referring to? The kind that develop gradually, often with the best of intentions, but eventually create vulnerabilities for an organization. Washington paused as our drinks arrived, waiting until the server had departed before continuing. I've seen it happen in both military and civilian organizations. Corners get cut, relationships become too familiar, and before you know it, lines have been crossed. I took a sip of my water, considering my response carefully. Washington seemed to be offering information, but I couldn't yet determine whether he was an ally or a potential adversary. Are you suggesting there may be irregularities in our government contracts? I asked, watching his reaction closely. He met my gaze directly. I'm suggesting that the environment in which defense contracting operates has inherent pressures and temptations. Your father navigated those waters for many years, usually with admirable integrity. But the European expansion failure created a perfect storm of circumstances. The specific reference to the European expansion, the catalyst we had identified in our father's journals, confirmed that Washington knew more than he was initially letting on. You seem to have insights into the company's financial history that go beyond what's been shared at board meetings, I observed. Washington nodded, a flicker of something, regret, concern, crossing his features. When I joined the board, your father took me into his confidence regarding certain historical decisions. He believed my background might help provide guidance on remediation strategies. Remediation strategies, I repeated, the implications clear. So you knew about the offshore accounts and the arrangements with Carlyle. If my direct acknowledgement of what we'd discovered surprised him, Washington didn't show it. Instead, he seemed almost relieved. Not initially. I became aware approximately 14 months ago, when your father approached me with concerns about the sustainability of certain arrangements. He was looking for a way to unwind them without catastrophic consequences for the company. This revelation aligned with one of the turning points we had identified in our father's journals, a period when he had seriously considered ending the questionable practices. And what advice did you offer him? I asked. I recommended a gradual extraction strategy, renegotiating contracts to more transparent terms, implementing enhanced compliance protocols, and creating documentation that would support a potential voluntary disclosure to authorities. Washington's expression darkened. Unfortunately, your father's sudden passing occurred before we could implement the plan. I absorbed this information, reassessing my understanding of both Washington's role and my father's intentions. Why are you telling me this now? Because I believe Rebecca has discovered something that puts her, and potentially the company, at risk. His voice lowered further. The safe deposit box materials, I presume. I didn't confirm or deny, still uncertain of his motives. What makes you think Rebecca has discovered anything unusual? The special committee proposal was telling. It provides legitimate access to exactly the areas that would contain evidence of the arrangements. Washington smiled slightly. Plus, Lawrence has been uncharacteristically anxious since your appearance at the board meeting. His concern has been noticeable. And where do you stand in all this, General? I asked directly. Are you implicated in these arrangements? No. His answer was firm, immediate. I was brought in precisely because your father was looking for someone with the expertise and connections to help navigate an exit strategy. My role was to be part of the solution, not the problem. Can you prove that? I pressed. Rather than appearing offended by my skepticism, Washington seemed to respect it. I can provide documentation of the remediation plan we were developing, including my handwritten notes from meetings with your father. I kept them secure, anticipating that this situation might eventually require clarity. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small flash drive, placing it on the table between us. This contains copies of those materials. I suggest you review them privately before deciding how to proceed. I made no move to take the drive. Why offer this assistance? What's your stake in the outcome? Washington considered the question, his expression softening slightly. I served my country for 30 years, Victoria. I've seen good people make bad decisions under pressure, and I've seen how those decisions can destroy lives and institutions, if not properly addressed. He paused. Your father was a good man who made some serious mistakes. He was trying to correct them when he ran out of time. I believe he would want me to help his daughters complete what he couldn't finish. There was something in his voice, a genuine concern, perhaps even a hint of paternal protectiveness, that suggested his motives might indeed be as straightforward as he claimed. Still, years in finance had taught me to verify before trusting. If what you're saying is true, why not come forward immediately after his death? I asked. I tried, in my way, he replied. I suggested to Rebecca that a comprehensive compliance review would be prudent given the company's government contracting portfolio. I even offered to lead it. But Lawrence intervened, convincing her that such a review would be disruptive during the leadership transition. Washington's jaw tightened slightly. I couldn't insist without revealing what I knew, which would have placed Rebecca in an impossible position before she had established her authority. His explanation made strategic sense, though it didn't entirely absolve him of responsibility. And Kingmaker? I asked, watching closely for his reaction. Do you know who that is? A flash of recognition crossed his face, followed by something darker. That particular chess piece has been elusive, even to your father. The email account is a proxy, managed through multiple layers of security. But based on the pattern of interventions, I believe it's someone with significant influence in defense procurement, possibly within the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency or the National Security Agency itself. This aligned with our suspicions but added a troubling dimension. If Kingmaker was a high-ranking government official, the implications extended far beyond Harrington Technologies. What about Carlyle? I continued, maintaining my methodical approach. Edward Carlyle was the initial point of contact, the one who approached your father after the European failure with a solution to the company's financial crisis. Washington's disgust was evident. He's been investigated several times for ethics violations but always manages to emerge unscathed. His sudden retirement and relocation to Portugal last year wasn't coincidental. He sensed increased scrutiny and removed himself from the equation. As we continued our conversation over lunch, Washington provided detailed insights into the government contracting world, a realm where formal regulations and informal practices often diverged significantly. He described how companies could be gradually drawn into questionable arrangements through a series of seemingly reasonable accommodations, each one creating leverage for the next request. The most dangerous aspect of these situations is their incremental nature, he explained. No single decision seems catastrophic, but collectively they create a web of compromises that becomes nearly impossible to escape without external intervention. His words echoed the progression we had observed in our father's journals, the gradual slide from an initial ethical compromise to a system of ongoing impropriety. Based on your experience, what options does Rebecca have now? I asked, setting aside my half-eaten salmon. Washington considered the question carefully. There are essentially 3 paths forward. The first is to continue the arrangements, hoping they remain undiscovered, a strategy I strongly advise against. The second is immediate voluntary disclosure to authorities, which would likely result in significant penalties, but might preserve the company's ability to contract with the government long-term. And the third option? A controlled unwinding, systematically dismantling the questionable arrangements while implementing enhanced compliance measures and preparing for potential disclosure from a position of remediation rather than ongoing violation. His expression was grave. It's the most complex approach, with considerable risks, but it offers the best chance of preserving what your father built while addressing the ethical breaches. As he outlined the specific steps such an approach would entail, I found myself reassessing General Washington's role in this situation. Rather than a potential co-conspirator, he appeared to be an ally who had recognized the moral compromise at the heart of the company and had been working, albeit cautiously, to address it. "Why are you willing to take this risk?" I asked as our meeting drew to a close. "Involvement in remediating these issues could expose you to legal jeopardy, or at minimum, professional embarrassment." Washington was quiet for a moment, his expression distant. 30 years ago, I was a young officer assigned to a procurement oversight role. I observed irregularities in a major defense contract but hesitated to report them, uncertain of the implications and unwilling to create waves. That hesitation resulted in equipment failures that cost the lives of 3 soldiers under my command. He met my gaze, the pain of that memory still evident decades later. I learned then that integrity isn't a luxury or a theoretical virtue, it's a practical necessity with real-world consequences. I failed those men once through inaction. I don't intend to repeat that mistake. His vulnerability was unexpected and affecting. This decorated military leader, who projected such confidence and authority in board meetings, carried a burden of regret that had shaped his subsequent decades of service. I recognized in his admission something profound, the understanding that our moral choices have consequences that extend far beyond our immediate circumstances. "I appreciate your candor, General," I said, using his military title intentionally to acknowledge the principles he clearly still honored, "and your willingness to assist in what will undoubtedly be a difficult process." As we prepared to leave, Washington handed me the flash drive again. "Review these materials with your sister. If you decide I can be of further assistance, I'm at your disposal. But Victoria," his expression grew serious, "move quickly. Lawrence suspects something has changed, and he may take preemptive action to protect himself." I accepted the drive, tucking it securely into my purse. "Thank you for the warning. We'll proceed with appropriate caution." Outside the restaurant, as we prepared to part ways, Washington offered one final piece of advice. "Your father often spoke of his daughter's complementary strengths, your analytical precision, and Rebecca's intuitive understanding of technology and people. He believed that together you would be formidable. Perhaps this challenge, difficult as it is, presents an opportunity to realize that potential." As I drove back to the family home, his words resonated with me. Rebecca and I had spent years defining ourselves in opposition to each other. She the creative risk-taker, I the methodical analyst. Our father's ethical compromise had brought us together in ways neither of us could have anticipated, forcing us to recognize and value the different perspectives we brought to the situation. When I arrived, I found Rebecca in Dad's office, analyzing the coded emails we had discovered. Her intense focus, brow furrowed, fingers quickly typing as she tested various decryption approaches, reminded me of our father during his most concentrated work sessions. "How was lunch with the general?" she asked without looking up from her screen. "Illuminating," I replied, placing the flash drive on the desk beside her. "He knows about the offshore accounts and claims he was helping Dad develop an exit strategy before his death." That got her attention. She looked up, eyes widening slightly. "Do you believe him?" I considered the question carefully. "I think I do. The drive contains documentation he says will corroborate his story, and his insights into the situation align with what we've pieced together independently." Rebecca picked up the flash drive, turning it over in her fingers. "So not everyone involved in this mess is an adversary. That's something, at least." "It certainly changes the dynamics of how we approach the board," I agreed. "But Washington also warned that Lawrence is growing suspicious. We may have less time than we thought." Rebecca nodded, a determined expression replacing her momentary relief. "Then we'd better get to work. I've made some progress on decoding these emails. The chess references appear to follow a pattern related to the classical Sicilian defense strategy." As she explained her findings, I was struck again by the complementary nature of our skills. My financial forensics would identify the improper transactions and their concealment methods, but Rebecca's technical expertise and pattern recognition abilities were crucial for understanding the communication systems that had facilitated the arrangements. Working side by side into the evening, we began to develop a clearer picture of the network our father had become entangled in, and a potential strategy for disentangling the company from its compromised position. The path forward would be challenging and fraught with risk, but for the first time since discovering the contents of the safe deposit box, it seemed possible that we might find a way through this crisis that preserved both the company and our father's true legacy. As darkness fell outside the office windows, I found myself reflecting on General Washington's story of regret and redemption. Perhaps our father's ethical failures, painful as they were to discover, offered us a similar opportunity, not just to correct his mistakes, but to transform them into a foundation for something better than what had come before. The company that emerged from this crisis would be shaped not just by Morgan Harrington's vision, but by his daughter's commitment to realigning that vision with the core values he had ultimately compromised. In that sense, what had begun as a devastating discovery could become a catalyst for renewal, both for Harrington Technologies and for the relationship between Rebecca and myself. The work ahead would demand everything we had to give, but together we might indeed prove to be the formidable team our father had envisioned. The next morning, Rebecca and I split up to pursue different aspects of our investigation. While she returned to the office to maintain her regular CEO duties and subtly gather information about Lawrence's activities, I scheduled a meeting with Harold Bennett, the CFO whose financial oversight would have been necessary to implement the offshore payment structures. Rather than meeting at the company, where our interaction would attract attention, I invited him to join me at the Boston Harbor Hotel for what I described as a strategic financial planning discussion. The waterfront location offered both privacy and neutral ground, professional but removed from the watchful eyes at Harrington Technologies. As I waited in one of the hotel's meeting rooms, reviewing the documentation General Washington had provided, I considered my approach carefully. Harold had been with the company for 15 years, serving as CFO for the past decade. His reputation in the industry was solid if unremarkable, a competent financial manager rather than a visionary leader. He had worked closely with our father, and now with Rebecca, maintaining the company's financial stability through various market challenges. The question was whether he had been an active participant in the questionable arrangements or merely a passive facilitator, someone who had implemented structures without fully understanding their purpose or implications. His nervous demeanor at the board meeting suggested knowledge, but the extent of his involvement remained unclear. Harold arrived precisely on time, dressed in his characteristic dark gray suit, his thinning hair meticulously combed to disguise its retreat. At 58, he had the cautious demeanor of a man who had spent his career avoiding unnecessary risks, which made his potential involvement in offshore financial schemes all the more puzzling. "Victoria, good to see you," he said, shaking, my hand with a grip that was slightly too firm, suggesting anxiety beneath his professional composure. "I was surprised by your invitation. Our quarterly financial review isn't scheduled until next month." "Thank you for making time, Harold," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. "I thought it would be valuable to discuss some aspects of the company's financial strategy outside the formal board setting. Sometimes a more candid conversation can be illuminating." He nodded, setting his briefcase carefully beside his chair. "Of course. What specific areas would you like to explore?" I began with innocuous topics: the current quarter's performance metrics, cash flow projections, potential strategic investments, allowing him to relax into familiar professional territory. Harold responded with his usual thorough analysis, displaying the solid financial understanding that had made him a valued executive. Nothing in his initial presentation suggested unethical behavior or deliberate concealment. After 40 minutes of conventional discussion, I shifted direction. "I've been reviewing some historical financial data as part of my special committee work," I said casually, opening a folder containing selected documents. "I'm particularly interested in the financial structures implemented after the European expansion failure in 2016. That was a challenging period for the company." Harold's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, it was. Your father made some difficult decisions to stabilize our position after those losses, including some creative financing arrangements for government contracts," I added, watching his reaction closely. His eyes flickered briefly to the folder, then back to my face. "We had to implement various efficiency measures across all operations." "Bah?" The careful vagueness of his response confirmed my suspicions. Harold knew more than he was willing to volunteer. I decided on a more direct approach. "Harold, I've discovered the Cayman Islands accounts and the payment structures associated with the Perseus project and subsequent government contracts," I said calmly, placing one of the offshore account statements on the table between us. "What I'm trying to understand is your role in establishing and maintaining these arrangements." The color drained from his face. He stared at the document for several seconds without speaking, his breathing becoming shallow. When he finally looked up, the carefully maintained professional facade had cracked, revealing a man caught in a trap of his own making. "Victoria, he started, then stopped, adjusting his glasses nervously. "These matters are extremely sensitive. I'm not comfortable discussing them without proper protocols in place." "I understand your concern," I replied. "But these arrangements appear to violate multiple federal regulations and potentially constitute serious criminal offenses. As a board member and as Morgan Harrington's daughter, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Harold glanced toward the door, as if contemplating escape, before visibly resigning himself to the conversation. "Your father instructed me to create these financial structures. He assured me they were necessary to secure critical contracts during a period when the company's survival was at stake. And you never questioned the legality of these arrangements?" He met my gaze with unexpected defensiveness. "Of course I did. I raised concerns repeatedly. But your father was persuasive. He argued that these were standard industry practices, unwritten, rules that everyone followed but no one acknowledged publicly." "Were they?" I pressed. "Standard practices?" Harold hesitated, then sighed heavily. "Not in my experience." But Morgan convinced me that in the defense contracting world, different rules applied, that relationships and facilitation payments were necessary to navigate the procurement process. He shook his head slightly. I should have pushed back. Harder. But your father was so certain, and the company was in dire financial straits after the European losses. As our conversation continued, a more complex picture emerged. Harold hadn't initiated the questionable arrangements, but he had implemented them despite ethical reservations. His technical expertise had been essential in structuring the transactions to avoid detection in standard financial reviews, including those presented to the board. The quarterly reports I've been reviewing for years, they were deliberately misleading? I asked, unable to keep a note of accusation from my voice. Harold flinched visibly. Not misleading in the overall financial position, the company's performance metrics and fundamental health were accurately represented, but certain transactions were recategorized or distributed across multiple expense centers to obscure their nature and destination. In other words, fraud, I said flatly. Technical compliance with creative interpretation, he countered, though without conviction. At least, that's how we justified it at the time. He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose tiredly. Victoria, you have to understand. I never received personal benefit from these arrangements. My salary and bonuses were always based on legitimate company performance. The distinction seemed important to him, that while he had facilitated questionable financial practices, he hadn't profited directly from them. It was a thin moral line, but one he clearly used to preserve some sense of personal integrity. What about Lawrence? I asked. How involved was he in these arrangements? Harold's expression hardened slightly. Lawrence was the architect. He made the initial connections with Carlyle, designed the overall structure, and managed the ongoing relationships. I implemented the financial mechanisms, but Lawrence drove the strategy. This confirmation of Lawrence's central role aligned with our existing evidence, but hearing it stated so definitively added weight to our suspicions. And Rebecca? Has she been involved in any way since taking over as CEO? No, Harold replied. Immediately. Your father was explicit that these arrangements were to be managed exclusively through the existing channels. Rebecca has been kept entirely outside the system. He hesitated. Though Lawrence has been pressuring me to bring her into the loop, arguing that as CEO she needs to understand all aspects of the company's operations. The revelation that Lawrence was actively trying to entangle Rebecca in the questionable practices was disturbing but not entirely surprising. If discovered, having the new CEO implicated would provide both cover and leverage. What would you do, Harold? I asked after a thoughtful pause. If you had the opportunity to correct this situation? To unwind these arrangements without destroying the company? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He considered it carefully, perhaps the first time anyone had suggested that redemption might be possible. I would implement a phased approach, he said finally, professional expertise momentarily overriding his anxiety. First, isolate the affected contracts and create clean financial structures for all new business. Second, develop enhanced compliance protocols that would prevent similar arrangements in the future. Third, prepare a comprehensive remediation plan that could be presented to authorities if necessary. His answer revealed both technical competence and a clear understanding of what proper business conduct should entail, which made his participation in the questionable arrangements all the more disappointing. That's remarkably similar to the approach General Washington and my father were developing before his death, I noted, observing Harold's surprise at this information. Washington knew about this? He asked, genuinely startled. Not only knew, but was helping develop an exit strategy, I confirmed, which suggests my father recognized these arrangements weren't sustainable and was seeking a way out. Harold absorbed this information silently, its implications clearly affecting him. The narrative he had constructed, of simply following the CEO's directions during a financial crisis, was being complicated by the revelation that Morgan Harrington himself had been working to undo these very arrangements. "I wish he had confided in me," Harold said finally, a note of genuine regret in his voice. "I would have helped implement a proper exit strategy." "You can still help," I said, seizing the opening. "Rebecca and I are committed to addressing these issues while preserving the company and protecting its employees. Your expertise would be valuable in that process." He studied me skeptically. "Why would you trust me after what I've just admitted?" "I'm not offering trust, Harold. I'm offering an opportunity for restitution." I leaned forward slightly. "You helped create this problem. You can help solve it. Or you can wait until it inevitably unravels and face the consequences without having made any effort to correct the situation." The contrast between these options hung in the air between us. Harold's expression shifted from skepticism to consideration, and finally to cautious resolve. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. "A controlled unwinding of the questionable arrangements, implementation of enhanced compliance measures, and preparation for potential disclosure from a position of remediation rather than ongoing violation," I replied, echoing General Washington's strategy. "We would need your complete transparency about all affected contracts and financial structures." Harold nodded slowly, considering the proposition. "Lawrence would fight this approach aggressively. He has too much invested in the current system, which is why he can't know what we're doing until we're ready to present a comprehensive plan to the full board," I explained. "In the meantime, you would continue normal operations while working with Rebecca and me to develop the remediation strategy." "You're asking me to directly counter the COO's direction," Harold observed, the professional risk clearly weighing on him. "That's not a small request. I'm asking you to help save the company from the consequences of actions you participated in," I countered, "and to do what my father apparently intended before he ran out of time." Harold fell silent, weighing his options. I could see the internal struggle playing across his features, the battle between self-preservation and the possibility of redemption. After what seemed like a very long moment, he straightened his shoulders slightly. "I'll help," he said quietly. "Not for immunity or leniency, but because it's the right thing to do, and because I've compromised my professional ethics long enough." As we discussed next steps, I found myself reassessing my impression of Harold Bennett. He wasn't the principled financial leader I would have hoped for, but neither was he a willing participant in corruption. Like my father, he had made compromises under pressure that had led him down a path he had never intended to travel. Unlike my father, he now had a chance to correct his course before the consequences became irreversible. Our meeting concluded with a clear understanding. Harold would compile comprehensive documentation of all affected contracts and financial structures, delivered directly to me rather than through company channels. He would also begin drafting the technical aspects of a remediation plan, working from the framework General Washington had developed. As he prepared to leave, Harold paused, a question clearly on his mind. "Victoria, may I ask why you're doing this? You've built a successful career outside Harrington Technologies. You could simply resign from the board and distance yourself from this situation entirely." The question caught me somewhat by surprise, not because I hadn't considered it, but because I hadn't fully articulated my motivations even to myself. "Partly for my father," I admitted, "to honor what he built and what he ultimately wanted to correct. Partly for Rebecca, who inherited this mess without any warning. And partly—" I paused, considering my words carefully. "Partly because some responsibilities transcend career calculations. This company employs hundreds of people who had nothing to do with these arrangements. They deserve leadership that will protect both their livelihoods and their integrity." Harold nodded, seeming to accept this answer. "Your father would be proud of that perspective," he said quietly before departing. Left alone in the meeting room, I reflected on the contrasting worldviews that had emerged during our conversation. Harold had operated from a framework where loyalty to leadership and company survival could justify ethical compromises. His professional identity had been built around technical compliance rather than moral clarity. My own perspective, shaped by my mother's influence and my experience at Meridian, where ethical boundaries were strictly enforced, prioritized integrity over expedience, even when difficult choices were required. These contrasting approaches weren't merely professional philosophies. They represented fundamentally different ways of navigating business challenges. As I gathered my materials and prepared to meet Rebecca at our father's house, I recognized that the path we were charting would require elements of both worldviews: the pragmatic understanding of business realities that Harold represented and the ethical commitment that I believed essential to sustainable success. The company's future would depend on our ability to integrate these perspectives into a new approach, one that honored the innovative spirit and technical excellence our father had fostered while correcting the ethical compromises he had ultimately regretted. It was a complex challenge, but for the first time since discovering the contents of the safe deposit box, I felt cautiously optimistic about our chances of success. Outside the hotel, Boston Harbor sparkled in the afternoon sunlight, the water's surface a constantly shifting pattern of light and shadow. It struck me as an apt metaphor for the situation we faced: appearances that changed with perspective, depths that remained hidden from casual observation, and currents of power that could either transport or capsize those who navigated them. With two potential allies now identified, General Washington with his strategic guidance and Harold with his technical expertise, Rebecca and I had expanded our resources for addressing the crisis. What remained uncertain was how Lawrence would respond when he inevitably discovered our efforts, and whether we could implement our remediation plan before external events forced a less controlled resolution. As I drove toward Cambridge, I found myself reflecting on Harold's question about my motivations. Beyond the explanations I had offered him, there was another truth I was only beginning to acknowledge. This crisis had awakened something in me that years of professional success at Meridian had never quite satisfied: a sense of purpose that transcended individual achievement and connected to something larger than myself. The challenge ahead would test every aspect of my capabilities and character, but it also offered something my carefully constructed career had sometimes lacked: the opportunity to create meaningful change rather than simply managing assets effectively. Whether we succeeded or failed, I was increasingly certain that this unexpected detour would permanently alter my professional trajectory, and perhaps my understanding of what constituted true success. Rebecca was waiting for me when I arrived. At our father's house, her expression a mixture of anticipation and concern. "How did it go with Harold?" she asked as soon as I stepped through the door. "Better than expected," I replied, setting my briefcase on the entryway table. "He's agreed to help us develop the remediation plan. Lawrence was indeed the architect of the questionable arrangements, and Harold has been maintaining them under his direction." Rebecca led me to the kitchen, where she had set up an impromptu command center: laptops, documents, and multiple notepads spread across the large oak table our family had gathered around for decades. A pot of coffee simmered on the counter, filling the room with its comforting aroma. "I've made progress too," she said, pointing to her screen. "I've been analyzing the coded communications and cross-referencing them with the company's secured project management system. 6 current contracts appear to involve the problematic arrangements, with 2 more in the final negotiation stages." I accepted the mug of coffee she offered, impressed by her methodical approach. "Have you encountered any resistance or suspicion from Lawrence?" "Not directly, but he's been unusually attentive today, stopping by my office twice with minor questions that could have been handled by email." She tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, a gesture that reminded me of our mother. "And he specifically asked about my lunch plans with you tomorrow." "Lunch plans we don't have," I noted with concern. "Exactly. He's fishing for information, trying to determine what we're doing together." Rebecca took a seat at the table, gesturing for me to join her. "Which means we need to accelerate our timeline. If Lawrence suspects we're investigating, he might take preemptive action." I nodded in agreement, settling into a chair across from her. Harold confirmed that Lawrence has been trying to involve you in the questionable practices, presumably to implicate you if the arrangements are discovered. That explains his insistence on my personal review of certain contract details. Rebecca's expression hardened. I've been putting him off, citing my need to focus on broader strategic initiatives, but he's becoming increasingly persistent. Over the next several hours, we integrated the information I had gathered from Harold with Rebecca's technical analysis and General Washington's strategic framework. The resulting picture was both clearer and more concerning than we had initially realized. The questionable arrangements extended beyond simple facilitation payments to include structured intelligence sharing that potentially compromised sensitive government information. This goes deeper than financial impropriety, Rebecca observed, her face pale as she reviewed the compiled data. The technical specifications being shared with Carlyle's contacts include access protocols for certain defense systems. If this information has been passed to unauthorized parties, the implications extend to national security, I finished, the gravity of the situation settling heavily between us. No wonder Dad was so desperate to find an exit strategy. As evening approached, we ordered dinner from a local restaurant, neither of us willing to pause our work long enough to prepare a meal. While waiting for the delivery, I received a call from Gerald Reynolds at Meridian. "Victoria, I've been trying to reach you all day," he said, his tone unusually sharp. "The Eastman Group has made their decision. They're moving forward with our firm, but they've specifically requested your personal oversight of the implementation phase." I closed my eyes briefly, the competing demands of my professional responsibilities and our current crisis creating an impossible tension. "Gerald, I appreciate your update. As I mentioned, I'm dealing with a complex family situation that requires my full attention at the moment. This account represents over $400 million in assets under management," he reminded me unnecessarily. "Your personal involvement was a key factor in their decision. We need you back in the office tomorrow to begin the transition process." I glanced at Rebecca, who was watching my conversation with evident concern, understanding intuitively the competing pressures I was facing. "I understand the importance of the account," I replied carefully, "but I simply cannot return to the office tomorrow. My family situation involves significant financial and legal complexities that cannot be delegated or postponed." Gerald's frustration was palpable even through the phone. "Victoria, I've been patient, but this is becoming untenable. The firm's interests must take priority over personal matters. If you cannot fulfill your responsibilities to Meridian, we'll need to discuss alternative arrangements for your position." The implied ultimatum hung in the air. After 15 years of dedicated service, my career at Meridian was being reduced to a binary choice: immediate return or potential dismissal. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was facing exactly the kind of ethical crossroads that had confronted my father years earlier. "I understand," I said finally. "I'll call you tomorrow with my decision." After ending the call, I sat in silence for a moment, processing the implications. Rebecca reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "You should go back," she said softly. "This is your career, everything you've worked for. I can continue investigating with Harold and General Washington's help." I studied my sister's face, the determination in her eyes, the tension in her jaw revealing the strain she was under. Despite her words, it was clear she needed my support in navigating this crisis. "No," I replied with unexpected certainty. "Meridian will survive without me for another week. This situation requires both of us working together." Rebecca's relief was visible, though she tried to mask it with practical concerns. "Are you sure? Gerald sounded serious about your position." "I'm sure." The clarity of my decision surprised even me. Some things are more important than career advancement or financial success. Dad understood that toward the end, even if he lost sight of it for a while. Our dinner arrived, providing a brief respite from the intensive work. As we ate, our conversation shifted to planning the next day's activities. We needed to advance our investigation while maintaining the appearance of normal operations to avoid alerting Lawrence. "I think it's time we visited the Technical Development Center," Rebecca suggested. "The Perseus project documentation would be stored in the secured archives there. If we can access the original specifications and compare them with what was actually delivered to the government, we might better understand the extent of the compromised information." The development center was located in a separate facility about 20 miles west of Boston, housing the company's most sensitive research and development activities. As CEO, Rebecca had full access rights, but her presence there would be noted and potentially reported to Lawrence. "We'll need a plausible reason for the visit," I noted. "Something that wouldn't raise suspicions." Rebecca considered this for a moment. "There's a demonstration scheduled tomorrow for a potential Japanese client. I could announce my intention to personally welcome them and showcase our capabilities. A perfectly reasonable activity for a CEO trying to secure international business. And my presence? You're evaluating potential investment opportunities for Meridian's technology portfolio," she suggested with a hint of her old creativity. "It's a natural extension of your financial expertise and would explain your interest in our technical capabilities." The cover story was credible and would allow us access to the facility without raising immediate alarms. We spent the remainder of the evening preparing detailed questions and documentation requests that would yield the information we needed while appearing to be routine due diligence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.